over, so I'm going to get moving. This is Responder for Purple Teams, Derby edition. I did this at B-Sides Cleveland, so this is a little bit updated. And thanks for coming to a stable talk at after 5 o'clock on a Friday. Much appreciated. So this is Responder for Purple Teams. We'll start off, I'll give you the finger. We'll talk about why this talk. Responder overview, where we'll just talk about the tool, some related tools that Responder is integral to, and then we'll talk about the WPAD attack that a lot of people know about because it's getting a lot of noise recently, and we'll talk about analyze mode and then some defense for Responder. So, giving you the finger, if anyone's familiar with the command. I am a full spectrum cyber person. I've been doing this for about 18 years. Defending and occasionally creating authorized cyber pathogens. I'm a sporadic SANS mentor and conference speaker, and first time at Derbycon and first time speaking. And thank you so much, Derbycon. You guys are the best. So this is my selfie. If you were to take it from like the business's camera, right? This is what I look like to them. I applied a Snapchat filter, didn't do anything. No cuter. That doesn't help. So why do this talk? Because I think that all teams, doesn't matter if you're red or blue, I think all teams can learn from this tool. There's a lot of interesting attacks that you need to know about, a lot of misconfigurations that you can detect with Responder, and then, of course, defense against. But why would I really do this talk?
Shame.
So because my own security tool betrayed me, and that's why I wanted to do this talk, because as a blue teamer, I implemented a system, and it essentially just opened up the kimono, and it was bad news. So that's why I wanted to do this. So who is familiar with Responder and what it does? Most of you. Okay, so just a quick overview. We'll talk about it as a broadcast name resolution protocol poisoner. We'll talk about it as an authentication server for all of these different types of servers, SMB, Microsoft SQL, HTTP, etc. We'll talk about it as a WPAD proxy server and the things you can do there. It can also act as a DHCP inform spoofer, which is to say if Responder's on your network and it sees a DHCP request come out, it can actually get in the middle of that and adjust things like the DNS servers or the default gateway. Pretty important stuff. It can do OS fingerprinting. It can also detect if the network it's on can do ICMP relaying, which might allow you to get into in the middle of traffic in a different way. And we'll talk about analyze mode as well. And this tool is under active development. The latest commit on Git just occurred at the beginning of September. So they're constantly adding new features to this thing. With regards to the poisoner, so LLMNR is a modern day, broadcast name resolution protocol, where if you don't have a DNS server in the way, this thing will allow systems on a local subnet to do name resolution. That's all it's about. It was implemented first in Windows Vista, and it continues up through Windows 10. Linux also supports it. NetBIOS name service, on the other hand, is old school Windows, like Windows NT type stuff. It's still enabled by default. Awesome. Wins for the win. You'll still find it out in the world. It's the same function where I don't have a host name, so I'm going to broadcast it out to the world and try to get resolution. And multicast DNS, same sort of thing. This is Apple's implementation. They call it Bonjour, Rendezvous. And it's also supported by a lot of printers and cameras and TiVos and Rokus and really weird devices. It's all about convenience, right? You're trying to put systems on a local subnet and have them talk, and sometimes convenience will get you into trouble. With regards to the auth server, so it supports SMB, which is a big one, right? So file shares. It can record and collect credentials, clear text, hashes for systems that think they're talking to a file server. Microsoft SQL, same thing. If the endpoint thinks that it's talking to a Microsoft SQL server, it will just give up its NTLM v1 or v2 credentials. The HTTP server looks a lot like IIS, if you look at it from an Nmap standpoint, and it will also collect clear text and hashed credentials. It'll also serve up a wpad.dat, which we'll talk a little more about. And then for clear text credentials, nothing's better than some of the older protocols like FTP, POP3, IMAP. Responder will pretend to be all of these things in the hopes that you will just give it credentials, and so it will record them. So a quick overview of the SMB attack. We always have to have our victims and our attacker, who will no doubt be wearing a ski mask and a tie and typing with one hand, as you do. So this is basically how it works, where you have a victim who maybe mistypes. They're trying to get to a file share, and they say, whack, whack, serve R. They mistyped it. They meant to get the server, but they mistyped it, and they typed serve R. So DNS is like, what are you talking about? I don't have an entry for that. So the client, if configured to do so, will beacon out and say to the world on its local subnet, hey, I'm looking for this serve R. Where is this thing? And the attacker, if running responder on that same subnet, will say, hey, that's me. Send me your challenge, or here's my challenge. And then the endpoint will respond back with either NTLM v1 or v2 creds. At that point, the attacker can take that and attempt to crack those credentials offline, or they can use it for man-in-the-middle type situation. So some related tools to Responder. Envy is a PowerShell implementation of Responder, actively updated, being developed right alongside. Gladius is an auto-crack tool for Responder, so it'll just essentially monitor the Responder file system, and anytime you see anytime it sees a new set of hashes, it'll just start cracking them, send them right over to John the Ripper, and let's just get to it. And then Chuckle is especially interesting. This is like a toolkit that will take all of these various tools and put them into one place to allow you to do file share type compromise. So a system, it'll go out, find systems that it can get in front of. It'll generate a payload that'll get bypassed by antivirus using the veil evasion framework. It'll intercept the SMB connection and then deliver the payload using Responder and SMB relay. And then it'll give you a shell via interpreter in the Metasploit framework. And then very interesting to mention, Rob Fuller's attack that was recently discussed. He has an attack where you can essentially grab credentials for a system that has a locked screen. So you can walk up to any machine that has a locked screen and put in a USB LAN turtle from Hack5 or the USB Armory, and have the machine will essentially just give its credentials over to this new network interface that's running Responder. New NIC shows up, system's interested in talking to it over that interface, and you end up with credentials, and it'll give you a nice flashing light once you actually have your credentials. So the WPAD proxy thing, we'll dig into this a little bit because, again, it's getting a lot of noise. But so Responder will listen to and broadcast and pretend to be a WPAD server. So what the WPAD is, if you go into Internet Explorer and pull up your options, you'll see there's a checkbox that is checked by default that says, auto detect my proxy settings. That's WPAD, and it's there by default. So what happens is, with that checkbox checked, the system will constantly be beaconing whenever it wants to talk out to the internet. Hey, who is my proxy? Tell me who my proxy is. And Responder will say, hey, that's me. You want to talk to me? Or you want to talk to the internet? You go through me, right? And in the meantime, you're middling the traffic. You can grab authentication data. You can, on unencrypted sites, you can inject HTML, which is handy. And then if you see a client talking through your Responder proxy looking to download an exe over HTTP, you can say, you know what? You don't want that one. You want mine. And give it maybe a malicious exe that has a backdoor in it, won't get detected by antivirus, all that kind of thing. Now, this particular attack is pretty well known. I'm not saying anything new. The first information presented about this attack was at DEF CON in the late 2000s. Dave Kennedy did a post on the Trusted Sec blog in like 2012, I think, 2013. And then even at Black Hat this year, there were like 4 talks talking about WPAD. And U.S. CERT issued a warning about the thing, about how horrible it is. So it's like on one hand, you have minds being blown, like this is crazy and insane and really terrible. But on the other hand, the greater pen test community is like, okay, I guess this is bad. And we've kind of known about this, right? Don't we know about it? I think. So the WPAD attack is the same thing as the SMB thing, right? You get your sheep who are out there asking for WPAD servers, a misconfigured endpoint, whatever, and they say, where's my WPAD server? I don't know. So it beacons out to the local subnet. The attacker who's running responder says, hey, that's me, and is now man in the middle for all the browser traffic. Pretty bad stuff, really easy to do. It's scarily easy to do. So let's talk about analyze mode for a second. And this is really where the blue team kind of comes in to play. So let's take a look at what endpoints could be compromised. Be an interesting thing, right? But what about systems that are eager to authenticate, which tend to be blue team systems? So inventory systems. I want to know what's out on the network. Kind of a blue team type function, right? Patch management, software deployment. I want to deploy software to your endpoint. And then there's network access control, another blue team tool, and the one that betrayed me. So I'm going to tell you a knack-knack joke. I'm sorry. It goes like this. Responder says, knack-knack. Hey, I'm on your network, knack. And the knack says, who's there? And responder says, some really weird box. I don't look like anything you've ever seen before. I'm so weird. Like, I'm just really weird. And the knack is like, some really weird box who, you know what? Never mind. I'm just going to send you credentials for a domain admin. Okay, right. NTLM version 1 hash and DA username. So that hash is garbage. I can crack it in 10 minutes. So what that really translates to is I connected a Kali box to the network with analyze mode running in responder, and 30 seconds later I received back a domain admin username and NTLM v1 response. Which at this point I think we've kind of reached peak fail. Because a system that was meant to deter rogue endpoints and detect them and kick them off the network is actually being sent very highly privileged credentials, the most highly privileged credentials that you could give. There was no mention of NTLM v1 or anything in the documentation. It was built per the vendor's docs. Again, responder running on this network looks nothing like a Windows domain member. Right? Looks nothing like it. So why would you ever send me DA username and hash? It was like this happiness denied moment where it was like, hey guys, we got this really cool solution. We're going to find all the rogue endpoints and we're going to do really great stuff. Oh, not so much. Not so much. So poor kid, right? Exactly. Poor knack getting kicked over like that. So use analyze mode, I guess, is the point. Your blue team tools might be betraying you. They might be configured the way that you were told to configure them, but they might actually be doing bad things. Your endpoints might be misconfigured. Your network might allow ICMP relaying, and you would never know that unless you looked at that layer 3 config on your core switch or whatever. Responder, it ain't just for pen tests, is the point. So I fired up analyze mode here at Derbycon, and just found a couple systems that were being misbehaving, I guess. A couple of them looking for WPAD, a couple of them looking for I don't know what. So shame on them. So with regards to responder defense, disable these protocols. These zero configuration type protocols, get rid of them. They're great in your house. They're no good in the enterprise. Ditch them. Disable WPAD and set explicit proxies if you need to. And you probably don't even need to, but if you do, you can set them. You don't need to say, okay, just broadcast out to the world to find your proxy, right? And then scan for responder instances. They're easy to find, and there are a couple tools that can help you. And SMB signing is another way to deter the man-in-the-middle SMB attack, but it could be painful from a legacy file server, legacy NAS type scenario. It's very, very good. If you nmap a file server, Windows 2012 by default, and it's a file server, it's going to come back and say, you know what? You don't have SMB signing turned on, and you really should. But getting it turned on across all file servers is not easy. It's something you should definitely dig into to prevent that particular attack. Oh, was I one behind? I'm sorry. I was probably one behind. All right. So to detect it, automate some Nmap scans. So from the blue team side, Responder has a very telltale Nmap signature. It looks like nothing you've ever seen. For the red team, yeah, you can modify that and make it look like anything you want. Blue team, hey, there's a very telltale wpad.dat. Again, can be modified. But why would you ever have some endpoint out in your world that is serving up wpad unless you told it to? So just look for those kind of instances. You shouldn't have something sitting on your network serving up this potentially malicious file. And any endpoint running on any of these ports. Like, would you want something sitting on your client subnets that's listening for email and file shares, and it's got a web server, and, oh, it's a SQL server too? No, that's a weird thing. So you should never have that kind of system on your network at all. This is an Nmap fingerprint. If you scan a Responder box, all of these ports that are listed up here, those are the ports that Responder's listening to by default. So a number of weirdo TCP and UDP ports that you probably don't want to see hanging around. Look at port 80. How normal was that, right? It's an IIS server. It's a Windows 2003 server. It's got a weird domain name, weird NetBIOS name. I don't want that. That's not mine, right? Pretty clear. The email servers. What's going on there? Like, very strange. Same with this is the ISA server that stood up for the WPAD attack. Saying it's Python. Why would I have a Microsoft ISA server that's written in Python? It's not true. So these are some telltale things. If you look at the WPAD file itself, it tells you right there that Responder served this up in a few different places. Again, you can customize this. But if you're looking for somebody, script kiddie, like somebody just standing up an instance of Responder, you can call them out real quick if you're looking for this stuff. So assuming you've done all this, assuming you've shut off all these broadcast protocols across your environment, which I'll tell you how to do in a little bit. I tried to save a little time. Then start looking for systems that are broadcasting and are misbehaving, because they're probably not yours. So here are some things you can do there. From a network perspective, you can have a tap on your user traffic, span port, whatever, that's mirroring your user traffic. Send that to your IDS or your SIM. Look for WPAD files. Use an ACL to filter interesting traffic. If you don't want to flood a sensor with a bunch of garbage, you can put an ACL on that stuff pretty easily. Configure an IP helper address to point to your SIM sensors. That's interesting because IP helper is typically used for DHCP, but it will forward UDP broadcasts across subnets. So if you just tell, by default on a Cisco environment, you can say IP helper, and it will automatically forward UDP 137, which is NetBIOS name service. If you just add this line at the bottom, the IP forward protocol UDP 5355, that will also get your LLMNR heading towards whatever IP helper you configure. So then if you have a sensor listening as an IP helper, you actually see these broadcasts come across and say, wait a second, why are you doing that? I told you not to do that. And there is a tool to actually fish Responder, which is really cool. So if somebody's running Responder on your network and you want to find them, you can use this. This is from the guys at NetSpy. It's a Python script called Spoof Spotter. You have to run it on a per subnet basis. But essentially it beacons out every 5 seconds and says, hey, I'm looking for some garbage host name. And you configure that, right? Just beacons. And if someone's running Responder will say, hey, I know what that is. And you can say, no, you don't. That's a garbage host. Gotcha. And it will actually send you an email and say, hey, this is no good. And it's a Python script and it uses Scapy. So you could potentially write the script to say, okay, let's forward a syslog to the SIM or something like that, to say, hey, we just caught someone running Responder. And you can also do some interesting things with IP-directed broadcast, where you're actually broadcasting a single instance of spoof spotter across multiple subnets. You have to be able to catch the response though. So you have to have a tap in place to catch the response, because that won't get you the response. And then I thought about responder honeypots. So like, what if we had our own blue team instance of responder that was only there to catch people who were looking for things that they shouldn't be looking for? So let's add some fake entries to our DFS namespace or to DNS that says like security, whack-whack-security.domain.com, or, ceopay.domain.com, like things that would be interesting. And then if somebody actually tries to access those fake entries, well, now not only do you know they shouldn't have been doing that, but you know what credentials they did it with. So that could be helpful in tracking down an attacker. So really quick, because I only got a couple minutes, this is how you disable LLMNR. I'm not going to leave it up here long enough, but the slide deck will be available. Just Google it. You can disable NetBIOS name service. Not to totally brush it past, but I should say group policy, you can do this. Registry, you can do this. With regards to the NetBIOS name service, you can do it registry, DHCP, and group policy. WPAD, same thing. And you can do weird things with DHCP in the Windows world too, where you can actually configure a false WPAD file via DHCP. Don't know why you do that. And then to actually serve up a fake name or a fake server for WPAD for your DNS servers, you actually have to follow this instruction from Microsoft, because they actually don't allow you to configure a WPAD server for security reasons. I don't know. Questions? Nothing? All right. Well, like I said, 5 o'clock on a Friday. Thanks for coming to my talk. Appreciate it.